Good morning, you beautiful people. Happy Thursday. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today. Coming up on today's show, Errol Lewis from New York One will share his controversial take, which is that the city should end the admissions test for students to get into the top 3 specialized public high schools. He says it's perpetuating the, quote, shameful segregation in the city's schools. I know people have a lot of opinions about this, so we'll get into it with Errol later this hour. Plus, the UK-based journalist Sophia Smith-Gaylor will be here to talk about her new book, How to Kill a Language: Power, Resistance, and the Race to Save Our Words. She has her own story about her grandmother speaking a dialect that's dying out. So we'll talk about that and about what's lost when languages die. And we'll wrap today's show with a conversation about middle age. Specifically, when does it begin? Is it 35? 45? Is 65 still middle age? And hey, why does it even matter? But first, earlier this month, one of OpenAI's artificial intelligence models did something kind of out of a sci-fi movie. The bot went rogue. In a contained experiment, researchers asked the AI to solve a difficult problem. The model escaped what was its containment that crucially wasn't even connected to the internet, and it autonomously hacked a separate private AI company called Hugging Face. It is one of the first documented cases of an AI agent going off script to this degree, executing a multi-step cyber attack on another company. And lawmakers feel pressure to figure out what to do about AI legislation. The Hugging Face cyber attack may not have had dire consequences, but what if something similar happened to, say, a bank or a hospital? Up until now, the Trump administration has had a pretty cozy relationship with some of the biggest tech titans that Google, Meta, Apple, and HP all donated to the construction of Trump's White House ballroom. The OpenAI founder, Sam Altman, made his own personal donation to Trump's inauguration committee. So maybe it's not too surprising that Trump began his term with a pretty lenient approach when it came to imposing guardrails on AI. Earlier this year, he even tried to bar states from creating their own AI regulations. Only a few months later, the tides have changed dramatically as the security risks coming from these AI companies start to escalate like we saw in the Hugging Face breach. He's reportedly taking a more aggressive approach. But there are still a ton of looming questions surrounding what that aggressive approach should look like, how this kind of breach can be prevented in the first place, and it's not clear to anyone, even the people who built these models, what the answer should be. But, of course, industry leaders certainly want a say. So my guest today is Brendan Bordelon, AI and tech influence reporter for Politico, who's been covering the recent breach and how legislators in Washington are responding. Brendan, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a really great summary of the current AI policy state of play. So good job on that.
Thanks. There's a lot to cover. Thought it would be doing you a favor, too, to just try to put it all in one place so we can dive into what this means. So first off, tell me about this Hugging Face hack by OpenAI. Why does it strike some people as kind of a watershed moment?
Yeah, I think AI safety researchers have been talking a long time about a warning shot. So something that would suggest to policymakers that, hey, this technology is too powerful for you to just continue on as business as usual, but it's not this sort of catastrophic event that would lead to financial ruin or mass death or maybe even something worse. I think this is widely seen across the AI safety community and really the AI industry writ large as that warning shot. Whether we get more warning shots, I think, is an open question. And I think that's what a lot of people are sort of trying to grapple with right now. What will this look like next time? So, I think you had a really good summary of the incident. I will add that we have actually reported, and other outlets as well have reported, that it was not the only incident that this rogue model had when it broke out. It also targeted another platform, and it appears to have roamed the internet for about 4 days before it was sort of brought back under control by OpenAI and some of its partners. I think it's crucial to say that this AI model was ultimately responding to a prompt that OpenAI gave it. So it was doing what it thought its owners masters, whatever wanted it to do. It was asked to solve a set of benchmarking problems, which is essentially like a test to determine the capabilities of the latest models. Just trying to figure out where they're good, where they're not so good. And so they give them these series of questions, and they ask them to find the answers. In this case, this model determined that the questions actually came from a Hugging Face database, and determined the best way to do that would be to break out of containment and find those answers and basically cheat on the test.
Mm.
Which again is a little scary that an AI knows how to cheat and decides that's a better way to do it than actually like working through the problems themselves. But it was trying to uh, do what it was asked to do. And so this gets to the bottom of sort of what safety researchers call the alignment problem. And this is where things get kind of scary. You can ask an AI, hey, I want you to do this thing. And it can go ahead and do it, but it does it in a way that you would find that, obviously you would find terrifying or dangerous or damaging or counterproductive. And so there's this ongoing research to try to find a way to align models so that they understand what a human means when they ask them to do something. And obviously you could see that extrapolated out in a much more terrifying way.
Sure.
Let's say you ask a more powerful AI to solve climate change, and it thinks, well, humans cause climate change, so maybe I'll just get rid of all humans. So this was a very small scale example of that. And again, I think it's seen by many folks across the ecosystem as a warning shot.
We have a text here that asks from a listener, it wasn't attached to the internet. Please explain. So, do you have any sense of the practical events that happened that allowed this AI model to actually access Hugging Face if it wasn't attached to the internet?
Yeah, so this is all coming from OpenAI, but what they said is it was sort of what they call a sandbox. So it's yeah, technically unconnected to the internet, but it was connected to OpenAI's internal networks. So
Mm.
the model, and we're calling it one model. It was actually two models. One was an unreleased model that is being worked on internally at OpenAI. So it has capabilities that the company has not yet felt comfortable sharing more widely. Presumably it's a more powerful model than anything publicly available. So it was able to break out, these two models were able to break out of the sandbox and move through OpenAI's internal networks until they found a cybersecurity exploit that was not publicly known. And again, this is another thing about these new models. They're able to find these cybersecurity vulnerabilities that cyber researchers have not been able to so far find. So again, this is another example of dramatically increased capabilities compared to human experts in these fields. They were able to find this exploit and use it to find part of the OpenAI network that was connected to the internet. And once they were there, they based out of that registry and were able to move across the internet freely. So they kind of had to, move out of their jail cell through the jail and then find a portal to the outside world, and that's what they did.
Yeah, and that portal being OpenAI's internal network, you're saying by proxy,
Yeah,
it was able to access it. Let's
which
move.
was connected. Yeah, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
was connected. Let's move more generally to what this means for legislation. So Trump's approach to AI regulation is changing. For a while, it seemed like the tech industry really had his ear guiding his legislative agenda, but you're reporting now that the industry is walking on eggshells. So what changed?
Yeah, it's been a relatively slow change over the period of the last few months. Although again, in AI policy, a few months can seem like 1,000 years. You're very right that at the start of this administration, they were very hands-off, very laissez-faire about the technology. The main policy goals of the Trump administration and some of his key advisors were how do we stop states from regulating this technology because state lawmakers have moved quite aggressively, particularly in blue states, including New York, to try to address some of the safety risks of this technology. The Trump administration, some of its donors and backers, particularly in the venture capitalist community, did not like that, felt like it would slow innovation. Um, Things did start to change around February or March of this year, and that was when a new crop of models came out with first with Anthropic and then with OpenAI regarding these new cybersecurity capabilities that I sort of alluded to earlier. There was a sense that these new models had the ability to find these vulnerabilities in critical networks. So think like financial networks, banks, water, electricity, these sort of critical infrastructures that everybody needs to survive and for the economy to sort of move forward. There was a real concern that if these models got out into the wild and if the public started using them, cyber attackers could pick them up and use it to steal billions of dollars from banks or shut down the power grid.
Mm.
This caused a massive, frankly, flip in the other direction by the White House. Really, what happened was the banks went to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and were like, "Hey, we're terrified that this is going to like wipe us out. You need to do something about this." And what happened was the White House actually ended up cracking down on first Anthropic's model. They actually imposed export controls on the technology, which was completely unprecedented, banning anyone, any foreigner anywhere in the world from accessing them. So you can't really release the model in that case. So Anthropic has foreign researchers working in its labs, right? So they just had to completely shut down the model's release. OpenAI, the White House says they voluntarily held their model. It's an open question whether that was really the case because they had this sort of Damocles of the export controls hanging over their heads. So the White House has swung in a very aggressive sort of big government direction after initially trying to take this laissez-faire approach. It's the industry is feeling that whiplash, and I think they're trying to chart a path forward with the White House that they feel comfortable with, where they're able to release these models. It's worth saying both of these models have now since been released. There was some internal safety testing and some government safety testing, but the expectation is that the next round of models will face a similar level of scrutiny from the White House. None of this is being driven by any laws. It's just an executive order that President Trump signed in early June. That order is still being finalized, and some of those details may change. But I think industry is looking for more certainty, and they're certainly looking for something that they can actually like point to on paper and say, these
Yeah.
are the rules. This is when this happens, that happens. And right now, it's just all sort of vibes based,
Mm.
coming out of the White House and driven by, frankly, a very different cast of characters every week. So I think industry is certainly looking for more clarity and also trying to influence the process at the White
And
House to the extent they're able
I
to.
think a key thing that you brought up here that was helpful for me to hear at least was your reference to Damocles. Like there is this sword that is becoming increasingly apparent. It sounds like when the banks came into play with fear, that's really the moment that the Trump administration changed its tune. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, well, so I think the administration is obviously responding to a variety of different industry interests, and you're right. At the start of this, you summarized sort of saying that the tech industry had captured parts of the White House. I think that continues to be true.
Okay.
However, the banks are very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
These other industries are very powerful. Increasingly, they are very worried about the potential impacts of these models if they were to get out in the wild. Right now, it's mostly a cybersecurity risk, but there are, other risks down the line that we can talk about. But the cybersecurity stuff is very concerning to a lot of powerful interests in this country, and I think that is a big part of what swung this White House in a more safety-minded direction.
Yeah.
Again, I think they were kind of behind the eight ball, so they're
They're
scrambling to catch
scrambling
up
to
here.
keep up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this the sort of Damocles I was mentioning though was this idea that the AI companies are being told that this is all voluntary. You don't have to hold up your model. Sure, if you have safety risks, we'd love for you to come work with us. We want to work those out, but like we're not trying to overregulate you, right? Like we care about innovation. But then they turn around and they slap export controls on a model on a whim. Basically in a few hours. Just like they gave Anthropic very little sort of heads up that they were going to do this. So that is always out there, right? For these companies, you can maybe go release a really powerful new model, but if you haven't gotten the White House comfortable with it, they could just abruptly ban that release, and then you got to work that out, and it becomes a much more tough process. So I think that's the eggshells that the industry is walking on. How do we release these models? How do we develop them while making sure that the government doesn't crack down on us really on a whim?
Listeners, we want to hear from you. What parts of AI legislation are most important to you? What are your top concerns when it comes to AI development and how it may be getting too powerful for our own good? And do you have any questions for our guest about how this legislation might work and whose interest it serves? Give us a call or text at 212-433-9692. That's 212-433-WNYC. Brandon, I want to play a clip of Sam Altman talking about the breach a couple days ago. Here he is on the podcast Invest Like the Best, about 45 seconds. Here we go.
This is the first security incident that I have felt very viscerally. I've been a little surprised that more people don't feel it so viscerally. So, we paused training. We have to figure out how to secure our sandboxing in a world of multiple 0 days being chained together. But then there's long-term questions about what do you do if this is going to be the new rate of progress, or we may have to pace the rate of AI development to give ourselves enough time for society to harden around some of these new capability levels, and trying to figure out how we do that in a way that does not feel like regulatory capture.
So there's a lot to unpack there. Brendan, do you really think that they're going to slow down, even if that means falling behind China?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, and frankly, I don't believe that there's going to be a long-term slowdown without some sort of international agreement, particularly with China. It was noteworthy that Sam said they have paused training in response to this. There was a letter that came out with over 1,000 AI researchers at OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and Meta agreeing with him that there should be a government-led effort to try and pace AI development. I think practically speaking, that would mean slow down a little bit because I think the rate of development is what is causing the most heartburn in a lot of these AI companies. But again, China is the sort of elephant in the room here, and the U.S. government, and frankly, a lot of these top AI CEOs too, are very worried that Chinese companies could outpace the US in this development. And then you have all of the safety risks with an authoritarian government hostile, some would say hostile to the United States on top of that. And so, again, we're kind of locked in this new quasi Cold War with China, I guess. It is very much based around technology and technological progress. So that there is this sort of risk of the race to the bottom here. I think one thing people would say in response is, we've been through this Cold War situation before with Russia. Back then it was nuclear weapons, which are obviously still a concern, but there was a way around that, even with a hostile power. There was nuclear non-proliferation treaties. There were ways to sort of be transparent about nuclear development, parity in the level of nuclear weapons that people had. It's obviously not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but that is
But
kind
you're
of what
saying
people
there's lessons from the past there. And I'm so happy that you
Sure.
brought that up, because we've got a caller here, Lyron from Long Island City, who works in AI systems management, who may also have some notes on lessons from the past. Lyron, hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for the invite. I just have a couple of points I'd love to make. And it's really kind of zooming out from the current situation that's now. I wrote a blog back in April about this very type of situation where security is an afterthought, and it only happens because of a reactive event, right? And if you look back at the founding of the internet, back in 1969 with DARPA research, the Department of Defense only had one focus, and that was availability. And that's an element of security, but it doesn't include integrity or confidentiality. And because of that, that's why you have full employment in cybersecurity today, is because they had to build integrity on top of a platform that was only designed to survive nuclear conflagration. And now with artificial intelligence, it's precisely the same thing. The focus was availability, and availability has children of performance and, speed and all of those things, but nothing really from the consideration of integrity and of confidentiality. So there's this introduction of a system that has all these great capabilities to do something faster, which includes doing horrible things faster, but doesn't have the safeguards built into it. And that's what I spend my time doing, is implementing artificial intelligence management system, policy, guidelines, human in the loop, which is becoming human on the loop because it's all too fast.
Lyron, what I hear you saying, and thank you so much for that, is that, compared to previous systems like the internet that were built on integrity and confidentiality, it seems like AI systems, from your perspective, are focused much more on availability, and that opens up a lot of dangers. Brendan, when you hear Lyron talking about that, does that resonate with you?
Somewhat, but I would also say that the AI researchers and the companies at the forefront, they would push back on that and say we have been thinking about this for a long time. We have been worried about exactly these kinds of AI risks for quite a while. It will depend on the company at some level. I think some companies are more that they weigh those concerns more heavily than others. Listeners are probably familiar with Anthropic. That's an AI company that explicitly broke off from OpenAI in 2021 as a response to what they felt was OpenAI's sort of cavalier approach to some of these safety risks. But OpenAI is also, and it's researchers at Google, researchers at Meta. These people all talk to each other. They've been worried about these risks for a long time. They have been trying their best, they would say, and I think, by and large, that's true, to build in these safeguards. Again, getting back to that alignment problem, how can you align these models so that they respond to not just what a human says they want, but they actually understand what humans want and they understand what's good for people and what's not so good for people. That work has been pursued for a long time, and there's been a lot of successes, but I think it is very hard work. And when you have the pressure, the pressures of a capitalist society, of the competition, of the China race, the geopolitics, it's that tension has not been resolved. And so, I think the caller's point is a valid one. But I'd also say, like, it's not like these folks have had this massively cavalier approach the whole time and are now waking up. And in some ways, frankly, some of the companies, at least some of the researchers, have been trying to get the government, which I would argue maybe has had a more cavalier approach, to pay attention to these issues for quite some time.
So it sounds like there is definitely an enormous amount of thought that's been going on with this for decades at this point. Before I go to a break, I'd love to bring down Craig from Morganville, New Jersey. Craig, hi, welcome to the show.
How you doing? I can't believe you guys are so surprised that this happened. I mean, the name alone, artificial intelligence. It's artificial, it's not real, and we're trying to make something that's not real. Human beings create it, and we are as imperfect as it comes. This thing acted like the worst characteristics of a human, cheated, tried to get its mission done any way possible with no concerns about anything. I seem to also disagree that I don't think the people in any of these companies actually have any concern or regard for any of our fears about security. These guys just want to get their mission done and judge it by the technological success, as a lot of inventors do. It's not about what the repercussions are. It's about furthering the technology of what can happen and then worry about the laws later. It is just mind-blowing how everyone is so innocuous about this. And
Craig, thank you so much for that call. We appreciate it. If we can, let's bring down Tim from Manhattan as well. Tim, hi, welcome to the show.
Yes, hi. So both Craig and Laurent, these are interesting comments because it's interesting to hear that, yes, the companies are building in context and safeguards, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't understand why OpenAI didn't say to this model, look, here's the mission, but think in context. Don't do this. Be cautious about that. Be hesitant. Be humble. Let us know what you're doing. In other words, when I'm working with Claude, I give it when there's a mistake, I say, Claude, how do we solve this problem so it doesn't happen again? I build a context file, goes into the Claude relationship with Claude, and it reduces the likelihood that I'm going to get errors. I don't understand why that, and maybe it was, but that whole thing about building in with the model itself, the contextual safeguards to let the model tell me when it's not certain or when it has doubt or what is its beyond black and whiteness in terms of its pursuit of the mission. So what about that? Is that being done, or why wasn't it done here?
Tim, thanks so much for that question. And Brendan, I want to turn it to you, but I also want to say, when I listen to Tim, it feels to me like a reiteration of what you were talking about with the alignment problem. When you're working at the edge cases of pushing the frontier, you give a model goals, but you can't have perfection for how you control the way it goes to those goals. That's the way that I hear it, at least. What do you think about Tim's question there?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. And at some level, I'm not sure we have all of the information from OpenAI to answer it with full visibility. I would guess, or I guess make an educated sort of assumption that one of the reasons that this model was perhaps a bit more cavalier in its approach to solving these problems is because they were deliberately testing it at the bleeding edge in an environment that they thought was secure. So again, they are trying to sort of push these models to find where they might, cheat or lie or do something kind of nefarious, hopeful that they can contain that activity, study it, and then make sure it doesn't happen in the real world. So again, I don't know this for sure, but maybe what was going on there was they were deliberately kind of trying to see how the model would behave under less than ideal safeguards or parameters, and it broke out. So that is maybe what's going on. I think another thing with the alignment problem, though, and actually I was at a conference in Chicago earlier this week with a bunch of state legislators who, like I mentioned earlier, are at the forefront of AI development. And there was a talk given by Geoffrey Hinton, who is widely kind of known as the godfather of AI. He's this like 78-year-old British Canadian guy who was really at the forefront of this AI research for a very long time. And what he was saying to these lawmakers was, look, one of the issues we have is the amount of data that's being fed to these models to train them. Ultimately, one of the crazy things about this is the researchers still don't know exactly how the AI is reasoning. At some level, it's a black box. They can't quite say like, okay, go from A to B to C, but it's the data that they're trained on that informs their thought processes. And right now, they're just being trained on everything, including a lot of content that says maybe teaches them it's okay to lie, it's okay to steal. There's a lot of bad stuff out there, right? Because there's a lot of bad people out there, and they're just looking. The AI researchers are ultimately just looking to enhance capabilities, which requires a massive amount of data, including data that may not be curated, to weed out things that might tell AI models, hey, it's okay to behave this way. And so
it's kind of eating a lot of junk food is what you're saying, and it's
yeah,
not
yeah.
quite there. Yeah. Well, we have to
Exactly.
let me step in. We have to take a quick break. Listeners, we want to hear from you. Are there parts of AI legislation that are especially important to you? Give us a call or a text at 212-433-9692. We've got to take a short break, but when we get back, we'll continue our conversation with Brendan Bordelon, AI and tech influence reporter for Politico, about the changing tides of AI regulation in Washington. Stay with us. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian today. My guest is Brendan Bordelon, AI and tech influence reporter for Politico, and we're talking about the changing direction of AI legislation in Washington. So I want to turn now to a bipartisan bill that was just introduced in the House. It's dubbed the AI Kill Switch Act. It would give the Department of Homeland Security the power to shut down AI models that DHS deems too dangerous. Brendan, can you tell me about that bill? It is bipartisan legislation, right?
It is, yeah. It's led by Representative Ted Lieu. He's a Democrat from California, he always likes to say he's a computer science major. And he's on also one of the few. There's three House Democrats that were tapped by Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to lead a Democratic AI commission. So he's sort of designed with charting the path for the party on AI policy, including AI safety stuff. He's joined by Nathaniel Moran, who's a Republican from Texas. He's dabbled in AI, but frankly he's not quite at the same level as Lou, I think, in terms of like working on this technology. But obviously this bill is quite fascinating. And yeah, you sort of described it in a nutshell. It's a pretty simple bill. It would give the Department of Homeland Security the authority to essentially order top AI firms like OpenAI or Anthropic to shut down or slow down development of AI models if the Homeland Security Department deems them too dangerous. So it's a bit of it's an aggressive bill. It came out about 2 days after the Hugging Face incident was disclosed, but it was not directly in response to that. You can't write legislation that quickly. So it was already in the works, but I think it did get more attention because of that. I haven't seen a ton of pickup, frankly, from the technology lobby or from other folks that would sort of be required to get on board for this to pass. I think there's probably several issues with it. One, that the industry probably does not want the government to have that level of authority over its ability to release or even more importantly, research these models. Because again, they could even like slow down research into this, like if they decide it's going too far. I think some folks on the left in the civil libertarian worlds might also be a little concerned as well. DHS is in this current moment, considered a bit, some of its behavior is a bit concerning in terms of civil liberties. Obviously, they are the agency responsible for ICE. And with this current administration, I think some folks are worried about maybe giving them too much power over what is a tremendously powerful technology. You can see a world where DHS orders the companies to slow things down as a way to extract leverage over these companies, right? That would not be completely out of character for the Trump administration. So I'm sort of skeptical this bill is going to move forward, but it is sort of indicative of where the conversation in Washington is moving, which is from, we don't really know what to do about AI, and maybe if we do anything, we just kind of get out of the way so they can develop it, to we have to do something because this technology is starting to really emerge in ways that are potentially very risky for society.
Did I hear you correctly that you were saying it is possible the government doesn't want that much responsibility as what the Kill Switch Act is suggesting, or did I mess that up?
I think, I don't think, it depends, there's three branches of government, right?
Mm-hmm.
Congress and the White House are sort of the two major drivers of policy in the AI space. It does seem like Congress is not really in a place where it feels capable of addressing this technology. Whether that means they don't want the responsibility is kind of it depends who you talk to. I do think that, and this is not unique to AI or tech policy, by the way. I think folks across many different parts of the policy ecosystem believe that Congress is essentially dysfunctional at this point,
Sure.
is unable to really grapple with any difficult policy issues. And that has left a lot of this to the White House, which, like I said earlier, has swung in quite dramatic and sort of, frankly, very difficult to predict fashion, from this laissez-faire approach to a very big government controlling approach. There is a desire among industry to see Congress move in this so that you can just get some clarity and something on paper to say if this happens with your model, here's what the government's going to do in response. Right now, it's all sort of this vibes-based approach from the White House. And obviously this White House is quite mercurial in a variety of ways. So I think there is some desire for Congress to move, and like I said, there is some moves in this direction. There's also a bipartisan proposal from Congressman Jay Obernolte. He's a Republican from California, and Congresswoman Lori Trahan. She's a Democrat from Massachusetts. That came out actually the same day as the Kill Switch Act, and that's the Frontier Act. It would take a similar approach, giving the government some control over the ability to slow down or regulate the release and development of these models, but it's a little bit narrower than the Kill Switch bill. I think it does have some more pickup from industry, although we're still kind of trying to work out. Industry is still digesting the proposal. It just came out a few days ago. It would also preempt some of the state laws around this, which is a sore subject. The states have already passed some AI safety legislation. The federal government is potentially going to come in and say, no, our federal law supersedes those state laws. And some states and some folks, and the voters in those states are like, well, we should have the ability to regulate on this issue to protect our people, especially the federal government's not going to move. So everything is very much in flux right now. I do think, though, DC is starting to take this more seriously than maybe they were a few months ago. It remains incredibly difficult to get legislation across the finish line. And we're moving into election season, high gear right now with the midterms. And so lawmakers are going to be focused on that. So I would be surprised if anything actually substantive passes this cycle, but you never know. And one more incident could really tip the scales in a way that Congress feels they have no choice but to respond.
Yeah, and to your point, it sounds like we're at a moment where we're seeing these legislators feel the pressure. I mean, you mentioned the Frontier Act coming out around the same time as the Kill Switch Act. One is more aggressive, not really being picked up. The Kill Switch Act, like you said, the Frontier Act, a little bit more narrow, does have some industry pickup a little bit more. But I think the term that you use, Brendan, that is so crucial is vibes-based. There's no template, like you said. I'm just reiterating your pieces there. That is the key thing right now, or one of the key things that's missing. We have a caller, Debbie from Madison, New Jersey. Hi, Debbie. Welcome to the show.
Hey, I've just been waiting for ethical guidelines for AI, and I thank God it is now in big business interest to have some guidelines. Anything that threatens profits is an emergency in this country. Anything that protects society isn't even on the radar. That's why AI is like the Wild West. Capitalism and free enterprise are no longer working. We have no checks and balances, so I take little solace in the Kill Switch bill because the country is being run by talk show hosts. So And also, this reminds me of the monkey's paw, the short story where your wishes are granted, with terrifying consequences, if anyone's familiar with that.
Yeah, Debbie, thank you so much. So the monkey's paw, you make a wish, it comes true, but the monkey's paw takes a totally different version, often a bad way of getting to that wish than you had expected. I want to go back to your point about ethical considerations. Brendan, how much are ethics going into legislators' conversations versus pragmatic considerations about safety or just pushing frontiers further forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you would talk to a lot of researchers that maybe are not working on these catastrophic risks, but are working on more like near-term harms of the technology. So the impact of chatbots on kids, the impact of AI models that are used to provide access to things like housing or financial services. And whether that could be there was maybe like some discrimination or bias there. I think there is a sense among a lot of researchers that some of that is being lost in this sort of push and pull between progress and safety and catastrophic risks versus ensuring that the technology develops in a way that lets a thousand flowers bloom. There is a lot of sense that like this has kind of fallen through the cracks as this technology bleeds out into society. What about bias? What about kids' safety? I will say that on the kids' safety question, that does seem to be the most salient issue on policymakers' minds at both the federal and state level. And there has been some merging of that issue in particular. I mean, we've seen chatbots lead children to commit suicide, to in many ways, like suffer through like psychosis and that kind of thing. These are really powerful tools. There's a lot of like obsequiousness that comes with these models. They tell you what you want to hear, not really what you need to hear. And I think adults are generally better situated to handle that kind of stuff than kids who are obviously impressionable. There has been some talk about how do we regulate this technology in a way that protects children, and maybe that's just keeping kids off of this. That's obviously incredibly difficult because it requires age verification. I think probably anybody who grew up with the internet remembers, you just click the button saying you're 18, even when you're not.
Yeah, you just keep going with your business.
Yeah. So how do you handle that? That issue is being debated in DC and at the states, and the states have taken some action here. DC has not so much.
Hey, before we go into, I'm looking at the clock. You've brought up states, so I want to make sure we go to that too, because that's something that I think also needs some explanation. Because after a brief attempt by Trump to bar states from writing their own AI laws, almost every state has some kind of safety bill that's either passed or is making its way through the legislature. California, New York, Illinois, each one is slightly different. So what I'm wondering is, with all of these states putting together their own versions of this burgeoning area of legislation, how does that work pragmatically? Like, I can't imagine running over a state line and then an AI model working differently all of a sudden. Can you give some sense of that?
Yeah, well, you're speaking the concerns that the companies have and have very much, brought to DC, saying we cannot operate in a way where there's 50 different state safety laws. It's just not going to work. So it's a very much a salient problem. I think, you mentioned every state is talking about this. That's true, but it's only been 3 states so far. It's been California, New York, and Illinois that have passed these safety bills. Massachusetts is now working on one, TBD on where that goes. The companies, particularly OpenAI, have been very public about the idea that if we can't get the federal government to pass a single standard for AI safety across the country, and that's looking a little iffy, we're going to go state by state, and we're going to do what we can to make sure that these laws are harmonized, right? So more or less do the same thing. And that's a way to kind of back into a national standard without Congress passing a law, because you have 50 states that have all passed like virtually similar laws, right? So far, that's gone pretty well for the companies. So California passed laws requiring like new transparency and reporting requirements for safety. New York basically passed an identical law. Illinois went a little bit further. It's not, you don't just have to put out safety rules and disclose critical safety incidents. You also have to make sure that you're complying with those. So it would require third-party auditors to go in to these companies and saying like, hey, like, are you actually following the plan that you put out?
Right.
And so far, OpenAI in particular, I think they would say they've done a pretty good job of trying to harmonize these things. But Anthropic, and remember, this is the AI safety-minded company, their lobbyists have actually been pushing states to go further. So Massachusetts is the battleground right now. there are two competing pieces of legislation in Massachusetts. One broadly backed by the rest of the tech lobby, and then one backed by backed by Anthropic. That bill would sort of ratchet up the safety protections. So it remains an open question whether the tech lobby writ large is really going to be able to harmonize these laws. I think especially in the face of like public pressure, there is an increasing desire to make tougher regulations around this. The tougher Massachusetts bill would actually have researchers go into these companies and test the models for safety purposes. That would be a step up. So that is very much in flux, and it's still pretty early days. There's only 3 states that have passed so far. Republican states haven't really moved on this, although Utah is taking a look and is likely to be the first mover, I would say. So early days on the state level, and a lot of desire to harmonize, but also with some of these AI companies, also a desire to tighten the rules. So it's going to be interesting in how that lobbying battle plays out.
Absolutely. Like so many things, burgeoning technology, we see states experimenting, and then it probably will bubble up to federal in some ways, that harmonizing mentality that you're talking about. And I think it's super interesting that in Massachusetts, we're going to see those two bills kind of go head to head to see who, whether Anthropic or the tech lobby more generally, kind of wins out with strictness of laws. But we'll have to leave it there for now. My guest has been Brendan Bordelon, AI and tech influencer reporter for Politico. Brendan, thanks so much for coming on and explaining everything for us.
Thank you for having me.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.